Good evening, Tintin heads. What you're about to listen to is a episode of another podcast I do called Good Book Boys, in which I read and discuss books with my friend Josh. And we recently read the book Tintin in the New World, a Romance. Now this is going to be a bit more conversational and a bit more informal than the usual Radio Tintin reviews, but it is Tintin related, so I think you might just enjoy it. So I hope you enjoy it, and your regularly scheduled Tintin reviews will be back very shortly.
Well, I'll tell you what, Josh, there's nothing better than when it's wet outside to get wet inside. That was an odd way of saying I'm having a beer, and I wish I phrased it differently. How are you, Josh?
I think that's a fine way to phrase it. I agree. I'm about one and a bit margaritas deep, so also getting wet inside.
How often do you enjoy cocktails?
It is a recent development. It's something Steph and I have wanted to be doing for a while, but this evening's the first time we've actually gone out and gotten some spirits and made something.
So what's next after the margarita?
Well, we've got some gin to use, so we might do some mojitos at some point.
It's actually pronounced mojito because it's got a J in it.
Right, yeah. Sorry, my bad.
But we're not here to discuss cocktails, because we're not the good cocktail boys. We are, in fact, the good book boys. And this is good book boy number 1, Alex.
And good book boy number 2, Josh.
Here to talk to you about what is or is not a good book.
Exactly.
And what are we analysing today, Josh?
Well, this week, it's a novel picked by yourself, and it is Tintin, a Romance, is it not?
Well, I've got Tintin in the New World, a Romance.
There you go. Tintin in the New World, a Romance. By
Frederic Tuten, who I believed was European, but he's not. He's American. I just thought there are many things that led me to believe this was by a European author, but we'll get to that in due time.
I would have expected that too, because the preface says about something about being friends with Hergé.
Yes, and we will definitely dive into that. Do you have the blurb there, or would you like me to take this one?
I think you should take this one.
Certainly. Tintin, one of the world's favourite characters, has travelled to Yucatan and Tibet, the South Sea, and even to the moon. But he has never journeyed into his own mind. Tintin, the boy detective, is trapped in the body and psyche of a teenager. While he fights evil, his own demons sleep. Then he is called to Machu Picchu, accompanied by Captain Haddock and Snowy, where he meets the woman he will fall in love with. That is the premise for Tintin in the New World, a Romance. Briefly, for the uninitiated, Tintin is a pre-existing character, a property. I've talked about Tintin before on this podcast, but essentially it's a series of comic albums. 23 completed comic albums released from 1929 to, I want to say, 76 is the last one, mid-70s. So big span of the 20th century by Belgian cartoonist Hergé. And it's sort of an adventure series, aimed at children. Primarily aimed at children. The titular character, Tintin, doesn't age at all. He's stays this sort of, it's ambiguous what his origins and what his age is, but young teenager, it's sort of assumed, on the cusp of adulthood, you could say, and he stays the same age throughout, even though the world around him is changing. The adventures deal with proto-fascists to communist dictatorships in third world countries, big span of the 20th century, but he essentially remains the same. So it was interesting to hear about this book, which I'd been aware of for a while, and sort of this idea of this ageless reporter sort of coming of age, if you will. Pun definitely intended.
Yes.
Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say, whilst the the Tintin albums are aimed at children, they do have a charm that is not
Yes.
lost on adults, and there's
Yes,
definitely something that
absolutely
can
right.
be visited as someone who is not a child anymore.
Well, someone could perhaps dedicate a large portion of their time to reading and reviewing them
Yeah, I
in
don't know
his
why anyone would
podcast.
do that though.
Well, hang on, don't bag it, because as we've just said, if someone was to produce a podcast called Radio Tintin and analyze, the sort of look at these albums from the adult perspective, you're absolutely right. I sort of skipped over that. There's absolutely a lot to be appreciated as an adult in both terms of the storyline and the philosophy and the artwork. And because it was so influential, and this is partly why I expected it to be by a European author, sort of as sort of post, I guess, 1960s, a sort of new wave of intellectualism in Europe, it became very fashionable to sort of interpret Tintin, this sort of rather innocent, innocuous character, and what he might represent. So I will get off the bat by saying I don't mind necessarily someone else interpreting Tintin. And I knew this was going to be a philosophical novel in the sense that it wasn't just going to be like a Tintin fan fiction. It wasn't going to be like my own Tintin fan fiction in the works since circa 2011. It wasn't just going to be your standard adventure. I knew it was going to be a more adult look, sort of looking at the psychology of Tintin. So I don't have any problems with that per se, but I do have some problems with how it was explored in this novel. Would you like to briefly summarize the story before we sort of dive into what we liked or didn't like, Joshua? What's the story?
Well, the story finds us at the start at Marlinspike with a somewhat melancholy Tintin who is essentially bored. Not much is going on. He hasn't been on an adventure in a little while. And whilst, he is quite well off and doesn't need to worry about anything, just kind of living the idle life is not for him. And so, yeah, he's quite kind of depressed in the early chapters of the book until he gets a notice, a letter from memory, some sort of instruction to go to this town in Machu Picchu, which he, really gets excited about and kind of travels to this town. He meets a set of characters and kind of follows the discussions among these sets of characters. There's a extended dream sequence. He meets the woman that's mentioned in the back on the cover, and kind of has some internal mental awakenings, turmoil, and that's the sum thrust of the novel is really that. I mean, not much else kind of occurs.
Yeah.
There's not any of the traditional Tintin activity or fare.
No, it's
that
definitely
you
not a
might
Tintin
expect.
adventure. You'd think Machu Picchu, exciting. There's going to be a set of pirates that want to steal Machu Picchu or something. Well, no, it's not Machu Picchu that's being stolen, but Tintin's heart just might be. Now, I didn't know this until I looked it up afterwards. The characters that Tintin meets are from a novel, a 1924 novel by German novelist Thomas Mann called The Magic Mountain. Were you aware of this?
I was not aware of this, and this is a novel that I've been wanting to read for ages and I haven't tracked down yet. So
there you go. Well, you got more reason to do it now. So, which I believe I incidentally know from cursory looking up, researching this book, is that it is also itself a coming of age novel in the same sense that I guess this one is as well. So I didn't know that at all. I don't know how my interpretation might have been different, but I was obviously with the title Tintin: The New World and my love of Tintin, I was after everything else was secondary besides the Tintin. Josh, I'm a bit confused about how I go about explaining how much this novel sucked.
I'm glad that you've said that off the bat because I really had the same feeling, and I was not. I was interested to see how you felt about it, given that you're kind of a bit further into the pool of Tintin and a little bit more committed to the whole niche. But I agree. I think blanketly the novel is just super rough.
What do you mean by rough? Because
Just
I will say it's very prosy, and
mm,
I think you have a greater appreciation for prose than I do.
mm.
Did you appreciate the long, long, long conversations that Tintin listens to and does not partake in for most of the novel?
I didn't. I didn't,
Yeah.
if I'm honest. Like prose and conversations like that, they need to be important and they need to be interesting. But really, like a good third of the book is these two characters yabbering on at each other, kind of arguing random philosophical things that
Yeah.
have no real bearing on anything at all.
Yeah, I, I would say Tintin probably has 25 lines in the novel, maybe a
Yeah.
bit more, but the bulk of the talking is not done by Tintin.
No, it's done
He
by
is,
what are they? Settembrini and Naphtha? Is
and
that the
that's
two?
yeah,
Yeah.
they're the two that are constantly arguing. Two of this sort of party of travelers that Tintin and Haddock and Snowy join. It was a very interesting choice to not have, I guess, Tintin more involved in these conversations.
Mm.
Um, and it's not like, again, if they had been having these conversations and then the author shows how Tintin reacts to them as this naive character, that's what I sort of thought we were getting.
Mm.
This very naive character, this very innocent character, this timeless character, being thrust into this very complicated world and seeing how he responds to that. One of the biggest problems I had is Tintin, particularly in how he speaks. He speaks exactly like all of the other characters. It doesn't sound like Tintin. And I thought,
Yeah.
okay, maybe they've lost something in translation. No, this is written in English, first of all.
Mm.
Tintin is hardly recognizable
Yep.
as Tintin.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. I was going to say that, the Tintin in this novel is actually super dislikable and
Mm,
yeah, I agree also, just not recognizable with the Tintin of the comic books. And I think, there's two ways to talk about this novel. If you took if you took away everything Tintin, right,
yeah,
renamed all the characters,
yeah.
had it nothing to do with Tintin, it would still be a terrible book.
That's what I
you
was
know,
thinking.
and
Yeah.
the tin and then you add the Tintin stuff back in,
But it's
and
almost worse because you haven't
it's
done service to the character.
exactly, and then you're just kind of trashing on the actual, the beloved characters of Tintin. So it's just such a strange. I was bewildered the whole time I was reading this novel. I was bewildered. A, how did this come into existence just in its own right? B, how did the estate of Tintin allow this to be written and still be proliferated?
Yeah,
Um,
can I offer my suggestion?
yeah.
So the estate holders of Tintin are, as we've discussed in private, as I'll tell anyone who listens, notoriously litigious.
Mm,
They do not want anything unauthorized being published, and this is supposedly in accordance with Hergé's sort of request that no one else sort of depict his characters. That was what he really didn't like to do. Even in like other projects that involved the Tintin characters, he always wanted to draw the characters. Other
mm,
people could draw the backgrounds and stuff. So with that in mind, there's been not in the same way as, for example, Asterix has continued on with different authors. Blake
mm.
and Mortimer, which was another Franco-Belgian comic, has continued on past the death of its original author. I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but there's been no Tintin. So this is, like, off the top of my head, the only authorized instance of someone besides Hergé actually writing Tintin.
Mm.
And I think it's possible, from my preliminary research online, this was originally published at a time when Hergé was still alive. And
Mm. Okay.
yeah, it first appeared in their entire
It's like
altered form in
it's in the
1975.
oh
Yeah, according to my
yeah, maybe that's right.
inside.
For some reason in my head I had like the mid to late 90s, but
And I think it's entirely possible. This is at a time when Hergé wasn't writing the stories, so he'd sort of got bored of writing the Tintin stories. He was more interested, and this is not insult or saying it in a cynical way. He was more interested in, I guess, securing the legacy of the Tintin character. And this is at a
Yep.
time when all those intellectuals were, reevaluating Tintin. Andy Warhol drew Hergé, and he said what an inspiration Tintin was. It was sort of Tintin was sort of viewed post fact. So I think this is probably at a time Hergé became. This is my theory. Hergé became aware of this at a time when he was trying to further the legacy of the character, and he thought, there's any interpretation is good. If they're talking about Tintin, that's fine. And he probably gave it his blessing, which is why it's able to be still published.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's why I think it is. But it's very disappointing that you'd have to think how many authors would love to write a Tintin story. Even not necessarily an album, write a Tintin novel, just like how much they'd love to have that chance. And the only thing that gets authorized is this thing, which I think does a greater disservice to the character than any fan art, which is so
vehemently chased down.
I think this does a much greater disservice. That's my theory for how it was made.
Yeah. Okay.
Was there anything you liked about this?
Not really. Every chapter I was just kind of like annoyed with what was going on. We've spoken about how Tintin's unrecognizable. Haddock was just like irrelevant.
Haddock's just barely there.
He was just there for the sake of saying his name.
Yeah.
They tried to give Snowy a consciousness, but is in the same vein as Tintin. It was just not right.
That is probably one of the few bright spots I found in this was Snowy's inner monologue. For some reason, I didn't mind Snowy the dog speaking so properly and pretentiously, because he's a dog. That's kind of funny. I was more annoyed. I think I actually got Snowy's character quite well, and it's quite interesting to see these inner thoughts of dog. But I hated when Tintin was talking.
Yeah, I guess all of it was fine except for when Tintin was talking about banging other dogs. I thought, I was like, what the frick?
My God. Yeah. Oh my God. Listeners, have you ever thought, hey, what if Tintin and Snowy talk about how much they want to
blistering barnacles
their respective females of their species? Well, if you have, you're in luck, because there's a scene towards the end where they just have that conversation. And I don't want to be. I like to stick to the idea that art is art. It can be whatever. I don't like to moralize about art. Because just because it affronts you doesn't mean it's immoral or anything. But on a personal level, the idea of Tintin, especially as he's depicted, I think he's said to be 12 at the start, isn't that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
which is, so first of all, that's younger than I would consider Tintin, but fair enough. That's probably the age boys start going through puberty. Fair enough. I don't want to see that Tintin. Oh no, not that I don't want to see it. It made me uncomfortable to see that Tintin in a sex scene, which is not gratuitous. It doesn't linger on it, but I don't know. I think you've got to build up to that a bit more, or explain it a different way. It was just weird. And again, I don't want to say that I'm opposed to an adult take on Tintin, but you've got to do it right.
Yeah, this is what I was about to say, is that it just needed to be done so much better. I'm all for an adult interpretation and a coming of age of characters like Tintin, but this was just so poorly handled. It was just there was no build up. It was not written very well. Tintin himself, you want to kind of see him move from the point that the point within the realm of the character that you understand, move to the kind of going through that awakening and coming out the other side may be different. But this was just a completely unrecognizable from the start, and then some stuff happens, and then he's I don't even know if there was even much of a character development within the novel of itself.
Well, look, I mean, we don't usually do spoilers on this, but I think don't listen if you don't want to hear what happens in this story. it's not really like it's not really like a major plot event because it's really quite random. But Tintin gets his heart broken by this woman, and then is contemplating suicide. Then, oh yeah, the
Blistering barnacles!
Earth talks to him,
Yeah, the ground.
and
Yeah.
talks. Yeah, the ground talks him away from suicide. And then what happens? Oh, that's right. He becomes a mythical Incan demigod and protects the natives of South America until he achieves his purpose and dies.
Yeah.
Josh, what the
Blistering barnacles!
part of that sentence describes the Tintin that you or I know or love? What the hell? What the hell was that?
I imagine the idea was that because it was written at a time after Tintin was, actively
Yep.
being written about, it was kind of maybe supposed to be like he's had all these adventures, he goes through this awakening, and then he finds his final calling, and this is like the end of Tintin. I imagine that's what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be this like circular ending of an era type thing. I
Okay,
think
like
that's
he
what it
finds his final mission, his final purpose. Is
Yes,
that like...
yeah, something like that.
See,
Yeah.
and that's interesting, especially since how the character originated in real life as sort of this very right-wing colonial character, and it would be really interesting to have maybe a commentary on how he goes from this at the start of his inception to what he is at the end of this novel, which is defending the oppressed peoples of South America. He goes from being a object of the oppressor to a defender of the oppressed. That's
Yep.
really interesting. That isn't dwelled on at all. He just
No.
takes some hallucinogenic mushrooms, puts on a jaguar coat, and becomes a demigod. What the
Blistering barnacles!
is that? Why the
Blistering barnacles!
is Tintin doing this? Like, is it? Sorry, have we been reading the different series? Sorry, what? And again,
I'm so
I'm
with
not,
you.
I'm not opposed to, I guess, more mythical elements. Like, for example, through pretty much the course of a day after losing his virginity and becoming a man, he physically becomes a man. Like he grows up. And again, I'm not necessarily opposed to that if it's done in like an interesting way. I don't demand necessarily strict realism, but it's not, again, as you said, it's not the Tintin I know from any point. He's not, and as you said, he's not likable at all. He goes from being this insufferable little bitch to being this whiny little bit. Like, where is like the optimism and the positivity and the righteousness that is like the most endearing quality of this character? He
Right.
never appears in this whole novel. It was baffling.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And something else, just like aside from Tintin and the whole thing, I found it really difficult to grasp anything else that was going on. Like, there was like the whole dream sequence that went on forever. Like, that was strange.
Yeah, it went on for a good 70 pages, like
Yeah.
this dream sequence where Tintin envisions a future with this woman and that I will admit was for me one of the more interesting parts of the novel, mainly because it wasn't characters sitting around talking about different political ideologies for entire chapters.
Yeah.
Or telling their life stories, which don't have anything to do with Tintin. So I found that one of the more interesting aspects. But it was strange to have that and then go straight back. I don't know what the point of that was.
I do feel like the concept of the novel was, let's bring Tintin into the new world, right? Let's use the title there. And so they were just like, how can we put as much messed up adult things?
Yeah.
And I don't mean adult like as in R18 rated adult. I just mean like adult as in like breakup, divorces, money, finances, children relationships, like all that kind of stuff. It's like how much of that can we squeeze in? I know how we can add a bit more of that. Let's do like a full life dream sequence and throw a bunch of that stuff in.
Now that you mentioned that, I'm starting to think, okay, maybe that was like the alternative life that sort of Tintin turned away by becoming, that's right, an Incan demigod. And it's like, I guess in contrast,
could be for sure, yeah.
That's like what he sort of, maybe that's what he was worried growing up would be like, now that you mention it, and he does something else. I don't know. Look, this is Frederic Tuten is a critically acclaimed author and essayist. This isn't just like something he scratched out. I have no doubt he put in a lot of effort into this. But you're a smart guy. I'm a smart guy. and I love Tintin. If I couldn't enjoy this, like, who's it for?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, and I know that you kind of through your Radio Tintin kind of put up that you were reading this, and I was looking through the responses, and a majority of them are like, it's a weird book.
Yeah,
Like,
so
I didn't
there's
think I saw anyone that was like, oh yeah, sweet, that's a sick book.
so there's two camps from what I've discovered an hour ago looking it up. Those on the Tintin forums really hate this book and the
Yep.
novelist, but they're coming from a very, very sort of don't touch Tintin
Like
at all,
purist, yeah.
which I don't subscribe to. The other ones, the book reviews on like magazines and websites, the reviews by official reviewers, they were largely positive of it.
Interesting.
Which is very interesting. I think maybe that is because of the prose. I can't imagine it's out of, you know, what it does for the character. One thing I will say that I thought this was one of the, like, I've got a list of good and bad things here. One of the good things I had was the name of the character, Peppercorn, which is like peppercorn. And I thought that's kind of clever because Hergé would use a lot of wordplay in his characters' names. You know, like there's a Colonel Spons who's meant to be like sponge in Belgian. I thought, okay, that's really clever. He's obviously paid attention to what Hergé's done, and he's sort of tried to replicate that, even if in a small way. No, that character's actually in Thomas Mann's book, so he didn't even do that. So that was one of the few things I was going to credit him for. No, that wasn't him either. So good, great.
Yep. I mean, like, we criticize the writing, and you mentioned that the book critics kind of praise it based on the prose. The writing itself is adept and fine. It's just, I think it's more about the pulling together of the concepts, and you know, just the structure and the things that happen in the book just aren't quite. They're just not quite solidified, and it just needed to be approached in a different way, I think.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I just wanted to comment on my, like, struggling to grasp half the stuff that was going on is we also got a bunch of like backstories of these other characters, but
yeah, the backstories are freaking books in of themselves. They go for, again, entire chapters. And maybe, are we missing something, Josh? Is there something about those characters' backstories that's meant to relate back to the character of Tintin?
Maybe
I didn't get it.
Maybe it's like Ulysses' link with Odysseus or something, and like we need to read Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain to like understand this book. Maybe that's what we're missing.
I mean, okay, but you're sort of setting like a lot of homework for people to read this book. And having said that, like we said, even if I didn't know who Tintin was, even if this is an unnamed character, I wouldn't enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%.
So you're right. Look, probably maybe knowing Thomas Mann would maybe help you a little bit, but like we know Tintin. We know Tintin quite well. I think that should be enough to understand a book that's called Tintin in the New World.
Yep, I agree. Now, the last thing I wanted to ask you here is, has reading this book affected your view of the original Tintin, and is there any kernel that's going to remain in your brain going forward?
Are you referring to any specific scene? Because for example, I don't want to think about Tintin talking about his penis, which he does in this novel.
I guess I was thinking of that.
Yeah, and I don't want to imagine Tintin describing to who is it? Oh yeah, that's right. His
blistering barnacles
talking dog about how he gets his how he got his first erection and what he did with it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's really not something I want to add to my interpretation of Hergé's works. But the thing is, it's probably not going to affect it because, to me, this is. I was going to compare it to deviant art of like Tintin and Haddock.
Blistering barnacles.
Yeah. But I think even that is more faithful to the Tintin that's depicted in the albums than the Tintin in this. Like, I feel like at least that comes from rudimentary understanding and appreciation of it. So, to answer your question, no, this isn't going to stick with me. Are you worried this will stick with you?
No, it won't. It won't. I was just worried about you with your ongoing interests.
Well, I mean, I may like that's the thing. Like, you can't look into the sexual subtext of Tintin too hard because it is so purposely devoid of sex. So, which has led many interpreters to see a sexual relationship or at least a romantic relationship between Tintin and Haddock because there's such a absence of femininity there. But
and again, it could have it's fine to be in there. It was just done so strangely.
Like a novel where let's take the basics. A novel where Tintin goes and falls in love, and it causes him to question and to look back on his life and reflect on it. That I've got no problems with that. I've got no problems with Tintin.
Blistering barnacles!
If you want to make Tintin
Blistering barnacles!
that's fine, but make sure it's actually Tintin.
Blistering barnacles!
And Tintin is
Blistering barnacles!
how Tintin would.
Blistering barnacles!
I guess is what I'm trying to say. Just respect the character and appreciate and understand the character because, as I've said several times, I did not see the author's appreciation of Tintin.
Yeah, and just reiterating again, nothing that is the original Tintin was present. Like pretty much every action that this Tintin took had nothing that the original Tintin would in common, and I just think,
Well, there is that scene. Sorry, you go.
I was just saying, like the woman he falls in love with is essentially a prostitute.
Yes.
And I just think there would have been so much more for a boy reporter, an investigative journalist. I just feel like there would have been more wrestling with that and uncovering that than kind of.
And Josh, I'd love to see the kind of girl that Tintin would fall in love with. Like, I'd love to see, the woman who makes, Tintin grow up essentially. I think that's a really good idea. That's great. But you're right. I could not see the Tintin that I know falling in love with this woman that we've talked about. Couldn't see it at all.
Exactly. And she also just doesn't have a presence in the novel either. Like, really, the main characters are this Settembrini and Naphtha and whoever that other guy was that spoke about his backstory for like 4 chapters. Those were the main 3 characters. And then, anyway.
And again, not to belabor the point, we're not getting much of... During these big winded conversations, Tintin says like 1 or 2 lines. He barely says anything. It's not like we get... It's not like these characters introduce Tintin to a brand new idea and then he's forced to consider that and how that fits in with his rather shallow worldview. That would be really interesting. We don't get that at all. It's, as you said, so much of it is
just
follows Tintin, but it's focused so much on other characters.
Yeah.
That about sums it up. Anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think we've covered pretty much everything.
Well, my final verdict is I'm glad I read this because I'm a Tintin
completionist,
and it's very interesting to read what is one of the very few approved pieces of I guess you could call it fan art, though I don't know how much of a fan you can consider Frederic Tuten, considering how he missed the character so entirely. So I'm glad I read it in that sense. The end of it, however, is, I think, for anyone who's not a Tintin completionist, this is a grotesque waste of your time to read. If you're curious, no, even then, hey, guys, if you love Tintin, don't read this. It's not going to add anything. Don't do it. Don't read this book. I've done it for you. There's nothing there for you. Just read a fan fiction online. I guarantee you it's going to be more respectful of the character than Frederic Tuten is. I'm giving this 1 star.
I am going to second that. I'm also going to give it 1 star.
Fantastic. Well, that's settled then in the grave. Frederic Tuten, I'm sure, is a lovely guy, and he's very critically acclaimed. He's a very talented writer, and he has made more money than I ever will. and I'm sure he has fantastic essays that are appreciated and loved, but do not read Tintin in the New World by Frederic Tuten. Josh, what are we going to read next week? Should we talk about socials, or should we do our next week's read? What do you
Let's
think?
do next week read first, and then
What do you
get
got
into
for me,
socials.
Josh? Maybe a novel where Asterix fillets himself. How does that sound?
If I could find it, I would suggest it. But I think because we kind of did a Tintin reimagined, that I might, even though this was somewhat of a failure, I think let's continue with the reimagining thought. And because this is a novel that I've been meaning to read for a while, and I am suggesting that we read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell.
Okay, now describe what this novel is to me.
So Hamnet is essentially talking about Shakespeare and his son that passed away, but I believe that in real life. But I believe the book is I can't remember if it's an alternative history in the sense that he doesn't pass away, or if it's just a kind of a peek at what life would have been post that event for Shakespeare and his family.
Well, that sounds very, very interesting. And I look forward to reading Hamnet. Oh, it's only published last year, so very recent.
Yeah, very recent, yeah.
I look forward to reading it, and judging by the very short entry on Wikipedia, it's been nominated for a number of prizes. So fingers crossed that is one for the good.
Should hopefully get us back on the track of the Good Book Boys. Yeah.
Which that's what we are. Yeah. Where can we find you, Jazzman?
You can find me at Hot Cup of Jazz. I am posting and mostly doing stories, and you can also find me at 98.7 RPPFM on Wednesday nights, 8 till 10
I
p.m.
listened to you last.
Yes, you did.
Week. Yes, and I feel like that shouldn't be a difficult thing. So make sure you do send me a message like you did last time and remind me, because the app is very easy to use, and you can just have it on in the background and listen to Jazz and Josh. And what more does a man need in this day and age?
Exactly.
Not very much.
Where can we find you?
You can find me. My Instagram is laterature_. That's LATERATURE_. Or if you'd like to hear me talk more about Tintin in a more scripted and more positive manner, I promise not all my dealings with the franchise are 1 star. Most of them are significantly more stars than that. You can follow my Instagram, tintin.podcast, or listen to my podcast, Radio Tintin, available on all good podcast apps, upon which you may be hearing this, because I think we'll release this on the Good Book Boys podcast and also on the Radio Tintin podcast, because Josh, content is content, and may we all feast upon it.
Exactly. What else have you been reading?
What else have I been reading? Great question. Let me take a quick look at Laterature _, which has a running record of the books I've been reading. Well, I am currently reading a short collection of horror stories. The best dark fantasy and horror from 2010, because I picked it up from a library a couple of years ago, ex-rental, I want to say, but that sounds like
okay. I was going to say, have you just stolen it?
Yeah, no, well, that's what you do. I'm pretty sure that's how the libraries work. I'm enjoying that, and I'm continuing. I'm reading a lot of, quarterly essays and Australian foreign affairs, just to keep my mind sharp. And what are you reading besides bad interpretations of Belgian or Franken comic characters?
So last podcast I was saying I was reading Madame Bovary by Flaubert. So I finished that, and that was terrifying. Do not read that book. It's horrifying.
Oh, really? Wait, in what way?
Oh, it's just too much. It's so unhappy and French, I guess. That it's written really well, and it's obviously a classic for a reason, but yes, I don't know. At these current times, it's just not edifying to read, and it's super depressing. And it ends with a really detailed description of the main character. I mean, this is another spoiler, so spoiler alert, but it ends with a really detailed, like, medical description of the main character eating rat poison and killing herself. And
Wow.
it's just horrendous. So I read
Mondays,
it.
am I right?
Exactly, Garfield. So I read that, but now I'm reading The Dubliners by James Joyce, which is a collection of short stories.
James Joyce, just write like a normal person.
Well, see, if you want to read James Joyce writing like a normal person, read The Dubliners.
Oh, it's not like Ulysses.
No, it's not like Ulysses. No. It's a collection of short stories, kind of about obviously people of Dublin at the time that he was alive, which is early 1900s. Really well written, really interesting takes. I mean, often also kind of sad stories, sad outlooks, but it's kind of it's realistic, and it's really well written
and easy to
so I'm enjoying it. Yeah, easy to read. You can read a story in a sitting easily, 2 stories even. So I'm enjoying that, and I'll move on from there to Middlemarch once I finish that. So we'll potentially hear what I think of that in the next podcast.
Well, in the meantime, I'm excited to crack into Hamnet. I'm excited to understand the relation to the name Hamlet, and if that was an inspiration for the son or vice versa. It wouldn't be it wouldn't be.
From memory, I think it's interchangeable. I think Hamnet and Hamlet are interchangeable back then.
Well, that's a bit silly, and I'm glad they stopped doing that, because you can't just interchange letters and expect people to understand.
What? You wouldn't be happy if I called you Annex?
I would not. I'd be like, you're mispronouncing my name. There's an L there. As you can see, it's a different letter, therefore it has a different sound. But anyway, hey, I didn't write frickin' King Lear, so what do I know?
Yeah, I'm just happy as long as there's not a character that holds the base of his penis while a dog tries to jump on it.
Oh, but don't remind me. We're over it. The book's closed. We're never dealing with that again. Oh, and then why? Don't talk to your dog. Don't show it to your dog. Anyway, on that charming image of Belgium's most loved comic creation exposing himself.
We've been the Good Book Boys.
We've been the Good Book Boys. We haven't had a good book this time, but we hope to next time, because as we always say, what do we always say, Josh?
If it isn't a good book, leave it on the shelf.
Amen to that. See you later.
See ya.